Before I pass microphone to Vasil Cherepanin, who will introduce today's speakers, let me say a couple of words about the event. This discussion is organized as a part of the School of Abducted Europe, which is one of the 6 schools of the Kyiv Biennial, and maybe some of you who attend these events at this location already for some time know about our program. This School of Abducted Europe is co-organized by the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna and by the Center for Visual Culture in Kyiv. It's for us, for the Institute, it's actually a logical step, next logical step in our engagement in Ukrainian culture, politics, intellectual debates. Our institute co-organized last year a big conference, Ukraine Thinking Together, which was initiated by Timothy Snyder. This series of events is a next step, as I said, and I would also like to use this opportunity to announce a new program which our institute is launching this year. It's called Ukraine in European Dialogue, and you can learn more about our activities and about our program from some leaflets from our institute's newsletter, which you are welcome to look in and take with you. So now I pass the microphone to Vasil, who will introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Tatiana. Dear friends, colleagues, and dear speakers, I'm really happy to welcome you at the Kyiv Biennial called the School of Kyiv. As Tatiana mentioned, this event, which is today organized by the Institute for Human Sciences and Visual Culture Center from Kyiv, is called Everything is PR, Totalitarianism in a Postmodern Kyiv. And actually it's somehow concentrated around the main issues that are raised in the Peter Pomerantsev's book, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, which was recently translated into Ukrainian. And it's really a very good option and opportunity to mention the sort of the field in which this book appeared, actually, because more or less at the same time the Kyiv publishing house Medusa also presented and published another book from Kyiv research from the Russian field studies, book by Ben Judah called Fragile Empire, How Russia Fell In and Out of Love with Putin. So I think both books are really very important, and I would hope play a really important role for the Ukrainian thinking and understanding of today's situation. And actually, being in the same context, I remember that during our debate and the presentation with Judah, we were talking about ghosts. That the Kremlin today and Putin himself is sort of surrounded and haunted by different ghosts, by history itself. So there are different ghosts which are haunting Putin, but for sure one of them, which totally refers to the topic and the framework of today's discussion, I would say, is the ghost of a person whose monuments today are usually in Ukraine dismantled, which is Lenin. Because actually the idea to analyze postmodernism in this kind of totalitarianism connotated framework is legitimate only in case if we understand that for today's Russia, if it's the case, actually the main lesson the lesson of modernism hasn't been learned. And that's why probably such theory and practice as postmodernism, being with anti-totalitarian intention, was transformed into its ideological opposition. And I think that today's discussion, especially with such participants, would add more about the field of reflection highly needed for the current Ukrainian situation to overcome and work through the recent political experience we have. So I'm really happy to introduce the participants. First of all, I'm really thank you for coming, Marsі Шор. She teaches European cultural and intellectual history at Yale University, and her field of study is history of literature with some connections to Marxism and phenomenology. The latest book of Marsі Шор is The Taste of Ashes, the afterlife of totalitarianism in the Eastern Europe. And currently, Marci is working on the book on the Maidan, as far as I understand, with a sort of phenomenological approach as well. Jurko Prохасько, who is essayist, translator, and psychoanalyst. It's really very rare that somebody from this kind of field is present and speaking in the Ukrainian context. So I'm happy to welcome you at our debate. Probably I think that psychoanalysis itself is the first discipline highly needed for Ukraine today, yes, that's for sure. So he works at the Literary Institute of Academy of Science and in the Institute for Psychoanalysis at Ivan Franko Lviv University. And Oksana Forostina, who already participated in some of our events, is a journalist, and now she is executive editor of the magazine, the Kyiv magazine called Kritika. Thank you again. Wish you intensive discussion and lots of questions afterwards. And just not to forget that this debate will be followed by another event organized in the framework of the same school, which is the lecture of Shalini Randeria, the rector of the Institute for Human Sciences, called The Center in Europe. So I would suggest for all of you not to go after this debate. Enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, well first I want to say I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so happy to see so many friends from all different places gathered here in Kyiv. And this is a fantastic room. I'm blown away by these windows over here. Okay, since I was the one who co-opted my two friends here into talking about Peter Pomerantsev's book with me, let me maybe begin by explaining why I thought it was so important that we have a conversation about this book in particular. Of course, there are lots of good books that are written and they're not all the basis for conversations. But let me explain a bit about why I think the questions that it raises are so important and so relevant and in some ways have been illuminated and laid bare by this book in a way they hadn't been quite so clearly illuminated before. And perhaps I'll start by telling you a little bit about what I was thinking about before my friends here decided to have a revolution and distracted my attention. That I was thinking a lot about the intellectual trajectories in Western and Eastern Europe through the second half of the 20th century. And in particular, I was thinking a lot about the ways in which intellectuals under communism took certain philosophical traditions in a different direction after 1968 than West European and especially French intellectuals. And I'll explain why I think this is relevant. And I was working on phenomenology in particular, and I won't bore all of you with any technical details of phenomenology, because I'm sure you've come here to hear about other things. But one of the things I was interested in, and one of the things that first captured my imagination as a 17-year-old who didn't know anything about Eastern Europe, watching what was happening in 1989, was this Czech slogan of Pravda cvítězí, the truth will prevail. And before I knew any Slavic languages, the very first word that I learned in Czech, which was my first Slavic language, was pravda, was truth. And I was struck by the way the Czechs used this word. And this was back in the early 1990s, my first time going to Eastern Europe. They used it as if it were actually tangible, as if truth were kind of an object, as if it were solid and concrete, as if it were like your keys and you could hold them in your hand and put them in your pocket. And I was fascinated by that because it was not the way we thought of that in the States. And in some sense, that initial impression I had of this being the first word I learned in Czech 27 years ago, and I've actually just come here from Prague, where I've been speaking Czech for the last few days, so I now have my languages all mixed up again. That in some ways planted the seed for the research I've done much later about phenomenology, and in particular about truth. And one of the questions I was asking was, why after 1968 does this particular phenomenological turned existentialist tradition take a postmodern turn in Western Europe, and in France in particular? Why do we move to Foucault and then Derrida and then deconstruction? Why do we move to a vision of the world in which it's not that there's no truth, but there's no stable truth. There's no more singular truth. Because life always goes on, so to speak, and the text is never closed. So there's no stable meaning, there's no stable truth, there's no stable subject, which doesn't mean that there is no meaning or there is no truth, but it's always fluid. It's always present in excess. This is Derrida's idea of difference. It's always flickering, it's always on the move, it's always unstable. And for Derrida, this postmodernist notion of the fluidity and the multivalence of truth and of meaning and of the subject, that was precisely the best defense against these ideologies like Nazism and Stalinism that took us into the totalitarianism of the 20th century. So in this world after 1968, in which there were no more grand narratives, we no longer believed in grand narratives, we no longer believed that we were heading to the end of history, we no longer believed we had all the answers, we no longer believed in the Hegelian vision of the world, that all the parts go together in the whole. That famous sentence at the beginning of Phenomenology of Spirit, das Wahres, das Ganze, and the seduction of wholeness, of everything fitting together and giving us a meaning and giving us a narrative. And Derrida says our best defense against that way of thinking that leads us into totalitarian oppression, is precisely to recognize the fluidity and the flickering of truth. And one thing I noticed as I started reading more Czech philosophers and Polish philosophers, and over the course of 20 years or so, this is now my whole life going by, is that they were drawing from the same philosophical tradition, and they were insisting that there was such a thing as truth. That at all costs you can't let go, even when you stop believing in grand narratives, you can't stop believing in truth. There has to be something like that holds together. Even if there is no end of history, even if all the parts don't fit into a whole, there still has to be meaning and there still has to be truth. And hence Havel's famous slogan that the truth will prevail. And there is one of the things I talked about when I reviewed Peter Pomerantsev's book. Some of you may have seen this film. It's a famous Polish film that was filmed in 1981 at the moment of solidarity, called Przesłuchania, Interrogation, starring Krystyna Janda, the most famous Polish actress. a film by Ryszard Bugajski, and starring Agnieszka Holland had a cameo role, which I think was perhaps the only time I've ever seen her on the other side of the camera. But in any case, it was one of the best films about Stalinism ever made. It was made in the early 80s, and it's set almost entirely inside a Stalinist prison cell. So it's very much a kind of Verständnis durch Nacherlebnis kind of Bugajski puts you inside this Stalinist prison cell for 2 hours. And there's a young woman, Kristina Janda, her name is Tonya, and she has been arrested. She's a nightclub singer. She's a nightclub singer who's young, who's pretty, who has a husband, who is worried the husband might have another lover, who herself has multiple other lovers, who in general is interested in enjoying life after the war. And she's singing at a nightclub, and she gets drunk afterwards with some men, and then she ends up in prison. She ends up in Stalinist prison, where she is accused of aiding a spy, somebody who is engaged in espionage and in Western conspiracy against the communist government. And it's set in Stalinist Poland. She doesn't understand what's happening at first. They keep her in prison. She's tortured, and she's interrogated, and she's tortured, and she's interrogated, and it's a rather unbearable film to watch, actually. And in the beginning, she denies everything. And gradually, she begins to acquiesce to more and more of the narrative, although never to the whole narrative that the interrogators are giving her in its entirety. And at the end of the film, we're never really sure, which of these men were actually her lovers. Whether or not the one they're sure was a spy was her lover. If he was her lover, was he actually a spy? If he was a spy, did she know anything? We never find that out. The film ends, we never find out what happens. So it ends with epistemological uncertainty. But at the same time, the film makes clear, and the filmmakers want you to know, that there is a true story. There is a kind of an ontological distinction between truth and lies. We don't find out what that true story is. But we are made to understand that it exists. That it's not just a matter of postmodern relativism that maybe she was or maybe she wasn't or maybe there's no such thing as truth. No, we understand at the end of the film that there is such a thing as truth even though we don't find it out. And there is a real version of the story. So you have, it ends with epistemological uncertainty, but not ontological uncertainty. There's ontological certainty that this ontological distinction between truth and lies remains and is solid even under conditions of totalitarianism. That even under conditions of that kind of manipulation, and even in this world of lies, there is such a thing as truth that survives underneath. And what fascinated me in Peter Pomerantsev's book, and he would not put it in this language of epistemology and ontology because poor Peter is trying to write this extremely accessible, very engrossing, very colorful and voyeuristic book that tells various tales of supermodels and prostitutes and grotesquely overweight young boys and political technologists. And it's a chatty book, and it's an anecdotal book, and it's written in a very colloquial, very almost kind of gossipy column type way, although he's a much better writer than any of the gossip columnists. But what he's describing, I thought, was actually philosophically enormously serious. Because he's describing this world of Putin's Russia, in which you have layer upon layer of narrative created by the political technologist, none of which is identical exactly to the truth. And he's describing a situation in which not only is there epistemological uncertainty, not only do we not find out what the real version of events is in any given case, but there's actual ontological uncertainty, that there might not be any real version of events. And he's describing this world of television journalists in which people have actually given up on the idea that there is some underlying truth, So you can strip and strip and strip, and one alternative reality simply opens up another alternative reality, which then opens up another alternative reality. So you're in this world of multiple intersecting fictional worlds, and it's not clear that there's any real world or there's any truth underneath those worlds. And this is this kind of new totalitarianism, or postmodern totalitarianism, where there's a kind of giving up, both by supporters and critics of the regime, that there is such a thing as underlying truth. That maybe there are just these multiple intersecting alternative worlds, and maybe in a postmodern enlightened society, we just kind of give up and let that be. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Marci. Actually, we began this discussion, I guess, months before this meeting, and I'm a bit embarrassed because I also have layers and layers and layers what I can tell about this book, and I may begin with a short detail. At first, this text appeared online, and as far as I know, also in London Review of Books as short essays by Peter Pomerantsov. Kritika translated one of these texts and under the title "The Cracks in the Kremlin Matrix." In 2013, so that was the summer of 2013, so just a few months before Maidan, and the matter itself was not so relevant to the whole agenda. After that, it's also a question of timing. Yeah, this book has had luck to be on spot, to be so popular in very good way, I suppose, because of what had happened after 2013. But even in that short text, published first on Eurozine and then republished in Transit, as far as I remember, even in that short text, the idea Marci had mentioned was already articulated. I mean, the idea it's not a hypocrisy. What we see in all these numerous people who works for Putin's propaganda, you know, all these persons we know very well from TV, like Mikhail Leontiev. He is one of the characters of this book, or Surkov. So it's not a hypocrisy. So it's not like they know something true underneath, but they work for the regime, for Russian TV, for propaganda, just because, okay, that happened. The hypocrites. What I think the main idea of Peter's book, and I think the most valuable idea, so that it's this very special state of mind, which is not specifically Russian. It's something like, maybe something universal. Specific state of mind, what I would describe as emptiness. So when Peter describes a person who worked from, from 9 to 6 for, I don't know, Russia Today or Kremlin PR or something like that, with all this crap about Ruski Mir and Orthodox Church and spirituality and all those things. So this person ends his or her work at 6 and sits at the car and start to listen to opposite radio station like Echo Moskvy, or she or he spends vacation in Europe and enjoy European lifestyle. So it's just this special approach to thinking, special kind of thinking, when you can just switch from one idea to another without any doubt, and it's not a hypocrisy, it's something different, because these people Peter describes in his book feel absolutely comfortable with both options, working for propaganda or for Russia Today and supporting Putin's regime, and enjoying benefits of European lifestyle or European culture and so forth and so forth. Surkov actually is one of these examples. So I think that's the main idea and actually we all have, I suppose so, we all have these difficulties with words when we try to describe it, because for example, I have a problem with this contradiction between numerous realities, like this postmodern notion that we have numerous realities and all of them are valuable, all of them are relevant. So this fluidity, and the idea of truth. I think there is no contradiction here. We really live in very liquid reality, when everything is changing all the time. But it doesn't mean that there is no truth. It's not like that. Actually, this contradiction between this so-called wise, smart approach, cynical, if you wish, which allows people to work for bad guys, to work for propaganda and to be on the dark side, and feeling okay about themselves, is an illusion itself. Because it's just very comfortable to feel good about yourself, to be smart with this statement that there is no truth, everything is pure. So people just feel good about themselves. And on the opposite, they would say, there is this dated, backward guys with their values, their beliefs that there is some truth. So they are boring dissidents. So they're naive and backward. So I think that the core of why this approach, and why not only Putin propaganda, but any post-Soviet PR approach is so strong, because it is based on this false opposition of fancy and smart approach of there is no truth, and backward approach that there is something really valuable. And I think I should stop on this point, and I know that Jurko has your theory, kind of theory about how it works. Yeah, and you recently thought about that in Vienna. Yeah, am I right?
Yes, thank you, but this theory helps nothing because I seem to be the only one here who don't speak the only one common language. So anyway, I don't speak English sufficiently enough to speak, but I understand English enough to follow you. So that's because I change now the place and ask Oksana to translate me. Because first we wanted me to speak in Russian, but then I realized that there are some people here who don't understand Russian, so we have no common language more. Перша річ, яку я хотів сказати, то дуже подякувати за запрошення.
The first thing I would like to say is to thank you for the invitation.
І я збирався якомога більше слухати і якомога надовше відтягнути момент істини, власне, той, що я не говорю англійською.
I was going to listen as long as possible and to postpone this moment when everybody understands I don't speak English.
Але тепер момент істини прийшов, і я мушу щось сказати.
So now that's the moment of truth and I have to say something.
Але найкраще, що я можу зробити в цій ситуації, це говорити коротко.
The best thing I can do in this situation is to be short.
Принаймні короткими реченнями.
At least I will try to speak in short sentences.
Перша річ, яку я хотів сказати, походить з моєї ідентичності перекладацької. Я хотів дуже похвалити чудесний переклад Андрія Бондаря.
The first thing I would like to say is derives from my identity as a translator. I would like to praise Andriy Bondar for his great Ukrainian translation.
Друга річ, яку я хотів сказати, то те, що ми вже є всередині двох важливих для мене поняття ідентичності, якої нема, коли нема правди.
And the second thing I would like to say is that we are already in between of two important terms. And the first term is identity, which is not exist when there is no truth.
А друга річ є поняття перекладу, який також неможливий, якщо нема оригіналу.
And the first term is translation, which is also impossible when there is no original.
Це означає, якщо нема перекладу, то немає комунікації.
That means when there is no translation, there is no communication.
Це означає для мене засадничу річ, що коли немає правди, то нема комунікації, значить нема засадничої можливості порозумітися.
That means for me a fundamental notion. When there is no translation, there is no communication. Yeah?
Нема можливості засадничої порозумітися взагалі.
And there is no fundamental possibility to communicate at all.
Однак, коли я чую фразу, чудесну фразу, що все є можливо і нічого не є певного, то мені відразу думається інша фраза.
But when I hear this beautiful coined phrase, nothing is true and everything
possible.
Everything is possible.
Possible, nothing is true.
And nothing is true, or another thing comes to my mind.
То якщо нічого не є правдиве і все є можливе, то я кажу для себе, для мене це означає тільки одне, що насилля є дуже ймовірне, а війна і смерть є дуже близько.
When I hear that nothing is true and everything is possible, I just think that violence is very possible and war is very close.
And death. І тут ми зачепимо питання неможливості перекладу в прикладному сенсі.
And now we come to the impossibility of translation in a very down-to-earth sense.
Тому що ані хвалена німецька мова, ані велика англійська мова не мають того розрізнення, про яке мені зараз буде йтися, між правдою і істиною.
Yes, because neither great English language nor great German language have this distinction between two words, the truth and the truth.
Я думаю, що важливо досягнути по оригіналу правда і істина, так, правда і істина.
Yeah, so it's
in Russian правда і істина, in Ukrainian правда і істина. І наступна моя думка є така, що там, де нема правди, там насувається неминуча істина. Where is no правда, that immediately comes to істина. І то в подвійному сенсі. І то я просто переклав. В подвійному сенсі.
So there is, I would like to describe that. There is two words, both in Ukrainian language and in Russian for the word, the truth.
Перше розуміння, перший сенс є дуже профанний і дуже цинічний, тому що там, де нема правди, там завжди знайдеться охочий встановлювати і промовляти істини.
Okay, so when the first notion is when there is no true, someone else will appear who will be very quick to set some fundamental truths.
І то, власне, тому, що є однак велика туга за істиною, так? І там, де нема правди, там обов'язково з'являється тим більше туга за істиною, а то є недобре.
I think when there is no truth, I would describe it as a factual truth, maybe.
Maybe absolute truth.
I'm trying to describe this distinction. When there is no truth as something you can approach, there is some longing for fundamentals.
Тому що тугу за правдою ніхто не скасовував. Так? І тут ми наближаємося до того, про що говорив Василь Черепанин у своєму вступному слові, про величезний потенціал тоталітарної спокуси у промовлянні і встановленні і володінні істин там, де нема правди.
So, under any circumstances, longing for truth is still here, and as Vasil Cherepanin mentioned under these circumstances there is some room for totalitarian for totalitarian temptations.
Друга річ є така, навіть коли правду скасовано, то ніхто не скасовував конфлікт.
And the other thing is when the truth is not here, it doesn't mean a conflict is not here.
Тому що постмодерний рай, як ми потрапляємо не в постмодерний рай, вільний від ідеологій, який намагається ліквідувати всі конфлікти, а ми потрапляємо в пекло, де є конфлікти, є інтереси, але нема правди.
So not we get into some postmodern paradise when there is no conflicts, but instead we get into some kind of hell.
Де власне, де є конфлікти, інтереси, але нема правди.
When there are conflicts and interests, but there is no truth.
Якщо нема правди, то немає аргументів. Якщо немає аргументів, то не можна порозумітися про інтереси, конфлікти і конфлікти інтересів.
When there is no truth, there are no points in dialogue, so there are no tools to communicate and to come into some terms.
І тут конфлікти, інтереси мають набагато вищу ймовірність виявити свою неопосередковану через комунікацію природу, а саме природу чистого насильства.
And thus conflicts and interests have much more better chances to open its real, genuine nature, which is violence.
Ти говорила про різні, начебто, типи свідомості, російську і західну, але в цьому сенсі справді різниці пропадають. Може, є певна інша поетика насильства в тому і в тому типі.
You said about different types of thinking, so Russian and Western, but Jurko think that.
Власне, може російське насильство є менше приховане, західне може є більше субтильне, воно є субтильніше, але по суті потенціал насильства в середовищі безправди є колосальний.
Jurko thinks that Russian is more obvious. The Russian approach to violence is more obvious than Western. Western is rather subtle.
Ну і нарешті, оскільки це вже і так дуже затягнулося, останнє моє розуміння істини, навіть якщо правди нібито нема, то істина нас все одно спіткає. В тому сенсі, не в сенсі якихось великих мудрощів, а в сенсі певних нескасованих закономірностей життя. І краще про істину домовлятися, ніж щоб вона спіткала тебе.
So, even if there is no truth in for us under this or that circumstances, the ultimate truth will be somewhere anyway. So we will come to this ultimate truth anyway.
Тому що маніпулятор завжди обов'язково стане жертвою власної маніпуляції рано чи пізно.
Because a manipulator always becomes a victim of his or her own manipulations sooner or later.
А невдала маніпуляція або ліміт маніпуляції обов'язково призведе до абсолютно очікуваного і логічного ступеня здійснення цієї маніпуляції через... Коли маніпуляція відмовляє, то залишається тільки насильство. І це є ще одна істина. За межею маніпуляції починається насильство і смерть. Тому все, дякую.
When the possibilities of manipulation ends, when the potential of manipulation ends, violence begins. So it's always the next stage after manipulation.
And this question about Pravda and Istina I was thinking about that actually on the plane ride over while I was reading Recensia, because we don't have that distinction in English, and we don't even have it in Polish, because istnienie in Polish is existing. It's not actually truth. You can see it's a degree of meaning shifted.
It's just a big letter and small letter. So.
There's a word verity in English.
There is a word?
Verity.
Verity. Right. Right, and that it has more of a sense of having something having been checked or authorized or the truthfulness of something having been verified. Verity. In any case, let me respond to a couple of other things that Jurko said. I was thinking about a few things. One of which is this idea that identity depends upon truth. And one of the things I became fascinated by during the Maidan, largely thanks to Katya, who was telling us stories in Vienna as everything was going on, anecdotally. Again, one understands the world above all anecdotally. And one of the things that Katya was telling us as she was going back and forth between Vienna and Kyiv and relating these stories was about this sort of politics of provocatia. And this really, it depends on a different understanding of provocation. The English isn't quite strong enough to carry this meaning. But I remember one day Katya was describing these gay activists who were not really gay activists, who were in fact paid to impersonate gay activists as they might look in the homophobic imaginations of people in the regime, who could then both stage a fake gay pride parade to alienate in an ostentatious way to provoke fighting with authentic gay activists, as well as to alienate, other more conservative people on the Maidan. And this was one of various stories of people being paid to impersonate other people, or people on either Putin or Yanukovych or various forces associated with them being paid to impersonate other people or to initiate actions that in principle they were against so as to cajole other people into participating in them. And I became fascinated by these politics of provocation because of what it did to identity. Like at a certain point, if you are a mercenary or an actor or an imposter, acting a certain role, is there a point at which you get caught up in the logic of the role that you've been paid to enact and then forget why you started doing it in the first place? And that seemed to me to spill over to what was happening in the Donbass when I was listening to stories about that, and people were trying to explain to me who was acting authentically, and who was a Kremlin agent, and who was maybe a local hooligan who was given some money, and who was perhaps a mercenary who had some incentive to get back at somebody else for something else. And at a certain point, it seemed to me we were in this kind of crisis of subjectivity, because you're in a world in which you don't know who is who, you can't figure out who is who. And it's not even clear that the people who are acting know who they are and why they're acting in the way that they are at a certain point. One of the stories that another Katya Yakovlenko then told me, which I was completely fascinated by, another anecdote, and Katya Yakovlenko, who's in New York at the moment, but thanks to Oksana, I met her here in Kyiv last year, and she's from Donetsk. And she was trying to explain who these different actors were whom she noticed doing different things there. And she said, well, and then one day, the Chechens came, and they didn't even speak Russian very well. And then they couldn't understand why from the bank machines they were getting Ukrainian currency instead of Russian currency. And then they called a meeting on Ploshad Lenina, on Lenin Square, where a kind of an elderly pravoslavnaya babushka, kind of elderly, Orthodox Christian grandmother, came out on Lenin Square to give an Orthodox christening to one of the Chechen soldiers to enable him to be victorious in battle against the Ukrainian Nazis. And Katya is telling me this story. She said, everything here is surreal. You have, the Orthodox woman giving a Christian christening to a Muslim soldier on a communist square so that he can go kill non-existent Ukrainian Nazis. So everything in this story is a fiction, and everything is happening. And what does it mean to find oneself in a reality in which nothing is true and everything is happening? And I became kind of fascinated with that again in connection with Peter's book about what do you do about this reality that is your reality, but it's not actually a real reality because everything is based on these multiple alternative fictions. I also wanted to talk, thanks to both Katya and Peter's book, I was inspired to go back to Hannah Arendt. And those of you who know me know that any excuse to go back to Hannah Arendt is a good excuse because she was one of my first loves and still one of my greatest loves. But I went back and taught an essay last year in connection with Peter's book that I hadn't looked at in a long time, which was her essay on truth and lies from 1967. And in that text, she tries to distinguish between the old-fashioned lie and the modern totalitarian lie. And she said that she begins with, there are two kinds of truth. And it doesn't, unfortunately, overlap with Pravda Istina. It overlaps more with the philosophical distinction between a priori truth and a posteriori truth. So there are a priori truths, like the truths of geometry or mathematics, or morality, Kant's categorical imperative, you should always treat people as an ends and not a means, or 2 + 2 = 4. These are a priori truths. But then there are a posteriori truths, which are empirical, factual truths, like, on such and such a day, in 1914, Germany invaded Belgium. That's an empirical fact. And she said that modern totalitarian lies, among other things, they focus on the second kind of truth, not philosophical truth or eternal truth, but on these empirical facts, things that happened. And the vulnerability of facts is that they're always contingent, because it always could have happened otherwise. One can always imagine a scenario. 2 + 2 will always equal 4 and cannot equal anything else. But it could always be that Germany invades a different country or Germany doesn't invade Belgium. That there's the contingency that is the kind of the characteristic of all empirical truths that gives it a vulnerability. So she says what distinguishes the old-fashioned lie from the modern totalitarian lie in connection to the second kind of empirical, factual truth is she says the old-fashioned lie was like a tear in the fabric of reality. So the very careful observer, if you're conscientious, and if you look closely, and if you use all your reasonable faculties, you can discern the place where reality has been torn, where something is not quite put back together right, where there's a rip in the fabric. She said what distinguishes the modern totalitarian lie is that there is no tear. It's a complete reconstruction of reality in such a way as to be seamless. So there's no more tear to perceive, because you're simply in a different world, which is seamlessly put together, so that there's no moment of break to observe. And that also seemed to me to be a kind of concept of truth that was worth returning to. And one of the things I then started doing obsessively that you could do in today's world, because everything is captured on YouTube and there for you to watch and rewatch, was listening to Putin's Crimea speech, which most of you wouldn't want to do more than once because it's not very pleasant. But it's that speech, in the way in which it was kind of set up and staged, that's not a tear in the fabric of reality. That's a whole other world. You enter that room and you're in an entirely other world. And that has the power of being seamless. And in this seamless world, everything can be made to fit together, because in some sense, you're not vulnerable to the same contingency of real empirical facts.
Thanks. I would like to highlight one moment Jurko already mentioned, and I mentioned before. The way of thinking I was talking about is not specifically Russian, and as I said, it is rather universal. The other thing is there are some conditions, some areas when it has much more benefits to live in this fictional reality because it's just comfortable. For example, after this book by Peter, I read a book, very similar book about China, and they're very. It's very much similar in the way of constructing this alternative reality. So it's not even about country or some special type of concessions, anything like that. I think it's the totalitarian nature of institution is what makes this type of thinking so beneficial, because it's all about surviving at the end. And I was thinking, okay, why it's so specifically Russian in this propaganda? Oh, okay, post-Soviet, because we are not free from this constructed reality even now in Ukraine. This approach is still here now. And I think it's about years and years of survival, because in many cases to construct this alternative reality, to construct an alternative identity for ourselves was the only way to survive. If you hide your real identity as anti-communist, as a Jew, Ukrainian nationalist, and so forth, it depended on circumstances, you could survive. So for our parents, for our grandparents, this way of thinking, when you just refuse of your own identity, of your memories, of reality, was the ultimate way to survive. That's actually my version why we are talking about Russia when we talk about this way of thinking. Should we open up the discussion?
Yeah, I think so. Because
Is that okay? Tanya's saying yes. Would somebody else like to talk?
То я в такому разі скористаюся з порожнечі і скажу ще одне своє міркування. І воно полягає в тому, я недавно побачив ще один тип Путін-ферштеєра.
I will use this chance this pause to tell the story. I recently met another type of Putin-versteher.
І то є дуже дивний тип, мені здається, досі недостатньо врахований і недооцінений тип.
It's another type, I believe it's underestimated for this moment.
То є абсолютно нарцистичний тип інтелектуального генія, який любить Путіна за загадану геніальність, який каже, що не може так бути, що це все неправда, що Путін має якусь велику ідею, великий план, велику конструкцію, і їхні афінітети, їхні притягання полягають на тому, що ті люди ідентифікують себе з цим відсутнім планом, тому що вони вважають, що Путін є великий геній прихованого плану, і я є великий геній, який цей прихований план розгадає.
So it's a special narcissistic intellectual type of Putin-versteher who praises Putin for his genius. And if Putin is such a genius, it should be something behind them. So there is some genius plan, and Putin is so genius, and I'm so genius that I understand that plan.
Він може не мати з ним нічого спільного, ні ідеологічно, ні світоглядно. Він може навіть бути йому бридкий у способах здійснення того плану. Але от ця нарцистична притягальність, та нарцистична Wahlverwandtschaft, то є несамовитий чинник.
So this versteher may not agree with Putin methods. He or she can even find Putin ugly, but he or she is attracted by this intellectual brightness and genius.
І то є ще одна велика небезпека того, що от коли нема правди.
And that's another danger of this situation when there is no truth.
Все так важко повірити, що завжди буде хотітися бачити за тим геніальний план.
It's so hard to believe, so we will always wish to see some genius plan behind us.
Okay, so I remember one article I read a long time ago. It was about Soviet type of thinking. It's called the language of crafty slave. So the crafty, it's лукавый in Russian. And I believe that this type of thinking is reproduced now. It creates uncertainty in the field of thinking. So when you have that uncertainty, the reality becomes so lucid that there is no way to rationalize the world around you, and you must feel it. I mean that the main goal of propaganda now is to make people feel, not think. It's just trying to make a point. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I have a few words to say. I think different types was speakers were talking about. First of all, about this truth and truth. I think, as I was told, it was more, the second part is Istina, it has to be maybe genuine truth. Genuine truth, yeah, it's more like blood going onto there. Yeah, maybe it's not my idea, I stole it. Yes, first of all, about these truths, I came to mind already like the Foucauldian regime of truth, because I think that's what we can see in the totalitarian regimes, when the political power, let's say that, or authority, and discursive authority entangle it together, came together with the special criteria of truth, which comes to regime, which created the discursive fundament for legitimizing of their power. So maybe we see in Russia maybe some kind of hybrid of the post-Soviet, post-totalitarian reality. About the feeling of emptiness, I'm not really sure about the emptiness as a right word, because, but it's only my opinion, I think it's more comes to melancholy, because because we have two good words, it's nostalgia and melancholy. And nostalgia is a reaction on the future or nearest past by the vision of very long comes past. But we have a melancholy as the stumble situation, when the people stuck in their reality, as the 24th August 1991, and a lot of people in Ukraine is still living in the situation when they don't understand what they have fallen in their heads. And maybe for the last year and a half, people start understanding what's really we have here. So I have, but in Russia, why we have, they have this 86%? Because of this melancholy, which, as Peter describes very good, they playing on. And in this case, I would not like to use the word propaganda, because, as Peter said, everything is PR. Because propaganda, in the way of Soviet reality, is the Weberian ideal type, is the monopoly on, let's say, interpretation of reality. Soviet propaganda not allowed to themselves to give few interpretation of same reality. Russian PR have the latitude of difference in the different regions and even different media. And they allow the Dosh, the TV Rain or something, and pretend that they have some dead alive, like I will call it opposition of Schrödinger. It's alive and it's not alive, nobody knows. And the last one, the propaganda. The good work and with connection with what's going on in Russian Federation, in China, what's going on, and here and was previously in Soviet Union. I think we stumble here on a good word on P2, and it's called pretending. The culture of pretending in Russia, in Soviet Union, and in China is very developed. And this is my question more to, maybe it's Oksana's question. Here we have a rise question of this subjectivity of pretending, because we cannot say what all the people are pretending, or some culture pretending. We have some people which are doing it the best way, and some of them follow them. or maybe I take too much time. I think I'm sorry. So that's all I have to say.
So maybe we collect like some more questions and then we will have a round of answers.
Thank you very much for your very interesting things you said. I have a few questions, if you don't mind. The first one is to Jurko. You said very interesting thing. Про істину краще домовлятися. It's better to agree on the truth, істина. Isn't it правда a truth if we have to agree on it? Якщо ми домовляємось про істину, то може це не істина, а правда? Чи може?
Я маю на увазі, що ми мусимо мати правди, щоб ними правдами, за допомогою правди говорити про істину. Коли ми маємо правду, то ми можемо через правду опосередковано домовитися про істину і домовитися про те, як нам бути перед її обличчям. А коли правд нема, то є або величезна спокуса узурпації істини, або ця істина застає нас зненацька і дуже неприємний спосіб. Наприклад, такий, як війна.
So the idea was, if we don't have some set of factual truth, we cannot negotiate about the truth, and we cannot agree on the truth if we don't have if we are not agree on reality.
And okay, just one question. Again to Jurko, I've been thinking, well, listening to you and thinking that basically this need to agree on truth. Yes, this is what we are watching when we have those UN Security Council meetings. And when you were talking about manipulation, that truth will prevail, it will win, and when there's no truth, there's violence. What do you think should happen or could happen, or maybe how to get out of a situation when we have manipulation, what we actually seeing at those security councils? Well, your version is when there's manipulation, there's violence. And in the situation of the actual situation when people have to agree or come to a conclusion, what happens? Well, sometimes someone storms off or something like that, but again, no solution.
Maybe we collect a couple of questions and then everybody gets a chance to answer what they want.
Very fast, just a couple of things that emerged in my head when I was listening to you. Well, first of all, thank you for relieving your truth, revealing, sorry, because somehow for me it rather caused much more questions and disappointments than some answers. First of all, what I really wanted to ask, maybe Marci, you can treat this question as an epistemological one. Do you differentiate the truth, be it pravda or istина, with how would you differentiate the truth and the fact? Yeah, it's like another word for the vocabulary which is, I think, missing in today's discussion. Second question to Oksana. So when you were describing it, it was already somehow voiced by a colleague of mine. this specific state of mind, and you mentioned emptiness, and characterizing that as a specific kind of thinking. So, as for me, melancholy is a bit a misleading path, because it's rather about Northern Europe than about today's Russia, or not speaking about Ukraine. So we are learning words. Yeah, what kind of vocabulary would you propose to name it? Because it's also very important to name it precisely. Yeah, to somehow to spell it. And to Jurko, I think for me it's still unclear what is, according to your perspective, the difference between Pravda and Istana. Maybe I think it's because, as I somehow noticed, that you are mixing vocabularies. Because even at the description of today's discussion, we mentioned that like we are discussing today truth, subjectivity, authenticity, which are actually the words from modernism. It's a modernistic vocabulary. And at the same time you were addressing to identity, which is totally postmodern term. Being very hectic and emerged in the 80s, 90s, like it's something to be changed, not to be preserved. So it's the same with the question of truth we have agreed upon or negotiated about. It's totally Foucauldian approach, actually. It's about the regime of truth, which is produced by apparatuses and so on. And the last one, about media, yeah, because we are like discussing some metaphors and some ideas as if we don't have bodies, yeah, or we don't perceive it in a physical way. So if we see and analyze in the context clearly that this kind of false idea, yeah, false quasi-truth, opposite to the truth, lies, is delivered also in through some media. Yeah, the truth has to be delivered, even if it's in the guise of lie. So if it's delivered, what kind of media, what kind of discourse would you propose for this politics of truth? You are, as far as I understand, you are trying to be on that side. So if the current media system is working for this kind of falseness, so what is your proposition for what kind of media this truth idea, truth politics has to be delivered? Thank you.
You were mentioning a lot different distinguish about the truth and lies and different truth and pravda and istina and so on. It's very interesting conversation. And from what I remember, even back many years ago in Greek philosophy, there were two different kind of approach to this. Is that one is about truth is what you believe is truth, and another one is truth is ultimate truth, and what is not true is false. So in one of them, that truth, what you believe is true, helps us somehow to develop sometimes, like what is not truth is just different truth for different people, so it teaches us tolerance, like in different aspects, like religion or racial or sexual. If it's not, you think is not true, it's just true for someone else. And another one is truth, it's either truth or lies, so it gives us some frames for the living. So my question would be, what do you think would be more beneficial for society in nowadays? Like which kind of the approach to select for to solve our problems in the current times? Thank you.
Maybe we move to answers. The endless row of questions.
Okay, thank you for all those questions. Let me try to pull a few of them together. So Oksana was talking about emptiness, and Yevgen was talking about this culture of pretend. And Jurko was talking about the relationship between the absence of truth and violence. So another thing I did this year, you see how my poor students are also the victims of all of my preoccupations. So I both returned to Arendt and I returned to Dostoevsky. Again, in part under the influence both of events in Ukraine and of Peter's book. Because this idea of nothing is true and everything is possible, the connection between there being no truth and everything being possible. That then made me think again about, the famous, even those of you who have not recently reread the Brothers Karamazov will remember this part. Ivan's famous, if there is no God, sio pozvolono. Do I have the udarenie in the right place? Sio pozvolono. So sio pozvolono, sio pozvolono. So if there is no God, then everything is possible. And that was Ivan's obsession in the Brothers Karamazov. That was Dostoevsky's obsession. And in a sense, that was that moment, in the 19th century, where it had been God that was holding everything together. God holds together truth and meaning and identity, and some kind of moral system, that there is some kind of distinction between good and evil that is not just a matter of individual subjective feeling. And Dostoevsky pushes this question where it should go. So if there is no God, then everything is possible. And that's the question that obsesses Ivan, and he never gets an answer to it, and Dostoevsky never gets an answer to it either. But arguably, for all of modern thought, running from the Enlightenment through Dostoevsky, it's all about an attempt to replace God. Is there any way you can replace God, even once you've gotten rid of God, and still have something that is holding truth and morality and meaning in place? And postmodernism is arguably the moment when you give up on replacing God. When you say, okay, no, there is no God, and there's no ersatz God, there's no substitute God, there's no, what Derrida likes to call a little bit pretentiously, the transcendental signified. No, there's nothing to play that role. There's nothing to hold it in place. And then you are potentially in this kind of dizzying, if you want to call it an emptiness or fluidity, or it's excitement because everything is possible, so it's creative and it's dynamic, but it's also what Arendt calls bodenlosigkeit. This groundlessness, there being no ground to stand on. And one of the things that I was watching as an outsider or an observer, watching the Maidan and listening to Maidan and then listening to the stories that many of you have told me, was this feeling that comes up at a certain moment that anything can happen. And Yevgen's friend Mikola wrote to me about this once. He says, we're in a world now in which anything can happen. There's no line that can't be crossed. And a lot of you, including Katya, talked to me about you're afraid to fall asleep because you can wake up 2 hours later and anything could have happened. Because there's nothing any longer holding the rules in place. So this connection between nothing is true and everything is possible, this sort of terrifying expansion of the realm of the possible. This also seems to me to be a kind of critical existential state connected to this new kind of dissolution of the boundaries between truth and fiction.
Thanks. First, very short about identity. What I meant is identity is is a very direct term of who I am. Yeah? I'm in the situation, for example, during the Second World War, when it was dangerous to be a Jew. It's not the identity in terms of 80s and 90s and endless discussion and identities you can choose. It's what I meant is identity you cannot choose. And what I refer to is this experience of different totalitarianism of modern era of 20th century, when, for example, even in my family, the birth certificates had been burned to survive. So that was the price of life, to forget who they are, to forget your family name. And the second again about terms, the emptiness. I think the right word here would be also vacuum. I doubt it's any kind of melancholy. It's rather this vacuum. So, and the distinction between this emptiness, this vacuum, and hypocrisy, is, if I understand Peter right, is hypocrisy presupposes that you have some small genuine self underneath. So when you come home from this work for Putin, you feel some discomfort because you are underneath, you know the truth. Underneath there is some genuine self, and it suffers. Yeah, and emptiness or vacuum is the absolutely comfortable state of mind when you fill this vacuum with whatever is beneficial at this moment. Whether it's your job or whether it's something you like jazz music or opposition radio. So there isn't any discomfort, any compromise. It's just absolutely normal way of thinking when you switch from one point of view to another without any discomfort.
Дуже дякую. Було так багато таких софістикованих питань, що найкращий спосіб не відповісти на жодне з них.
There were so many sophisticated questions, so the best way to deal with it is not to answer at all.
А натомість сказати щось цілком інше.
But instead saying something absolutely different.
То, що я хочу сказати, тут пролунала теза про те, яка є різниця між совєтською маніпулятивністю і постсовєтською маніпулятивністю.
I heard a point about the distinction between Soviet manipulation and post-Soviet.
Мені здається, що совєтська тоталітарна маніпулятивність заходила так далеко, що вона хотіла призначати людям і встановлювати, що вони мають бажати.
I believe that Soviet manipulation tried to deploy the wishes for people, to dictate what they can and may wish.
Перфідність постсовєтської маніпуляції і будь-якої, тут вже пропадає різниця між Заходом і Сходом, полягає в тому, що нема вже ілюзії тої такої абсолютної деміургічності продукування або встановлення того, що ми маємо хотіти, а наші бажання впрягають у колісницю продукування маніпуляцій. Словом, перфідність.
So the post-Soviet manipulation uses the wishes, people desires and wishes for the system to work.
Але тут знову ж так з'являється твердий ґрунт, ти казала про Bodenlosigkeit. Для мене тим твердим ґрунтом є три речі. Є конфлікти, є я забув третю річ. Твердою річчю, яку не можна знищити, так? Є бажання і є конфлікти.
But now we have a solid ground Marci already mentioned. So now we have desires and conflicts.
Я бажаю, отже, я є.
I wish, I desire, so I exist.
Я конфліктую, значить я є.
I'm conflicting, so I exist. I am.
І тут я би хотів звернути увагу на нашу участь, на участь наших бажань у тому, як ми дозволяємо на продукування довільної реальності. Тому що довільні реальності живляться нашими бажаннями.
And here I would like to challenge our desires and what.
Множинна реальність живиться нашими бажаннями.
It houses multiple reality uses our desires.
Я думаю,
it is fed by our desires.
Я думаю, що чим краще ми розуміємо власні бажання, тим ближче ми є до редукування правд. Дякую дуже.
And the better we understand our desires, the closer we are to reducing